this really changes things, in my opinion. This puts a lot of pressure on Jerome Powell to have to defend his actions, which he's already done in front of Congress, but this brings even more, scrutiny there. And there's even people suggesting that, look, because this is a witch hunt, because this is, the political party that's in power really trying to influence the direction of the Fed, that maybe Jerome Powell should resign just to, not show that there's any, influence against him that's changing his policy decisions. Look, I've always held firm on this podcast that Jerome Powell is not going to take any direction from President Trump. I've said that over and over again. He's going to follow the data, yada, 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 and I feel strongly about that. But when you start having things like this happen, now all of a sudden, every decision that Jerome Powell makes is going to be under even more scrutiny. It's like, well, did he do this because of the pressure that's being applied to him? Did he make this decision to get them to back off because he did do something nefarious, right? All these things come into question, and I would not be surprised at this point if Jerome Powell did decide to resign. And I think that's what they're hoping for, but not because he necessarily is guilty of this, but to provide some distance between the situation, right? So look, do I think that's the right thing to happen? No, not necessarily. I don't really have a strong opinion either way. I think that this is what happens in politics, unfortunately. And this is kind of this, church and state thing where the Fed should be independent from what's going on. I do believe that. And I think we're blurring lines here and we're having pressure applied that might make more sense for Jerome Powell just to say, okay, I'm just going to distance myself from this whole thing. Now, what would happen if he did that? Well, we would get a new Fed chair. But in the meantime, what would that mean? And, all indications are it could create a lot of chaos in the markets if they're successful in getting Jerome Powell to resign under this pressure. Now, look, with all that being said, I've seen countless, posts on social media that Jerome Powell has resigned or whatever. As of today, that has not happened. Today is Tuesday the 22nd when I'm recording this. So as of right now, that has not happened. And, I think it would be much more than some, AI postings on social media. It would be much bigger news if that were to actually happen. And, but I think it's possible. I do think it's possible at this point, given the pressure. And I think it would be, at least in the short term, pretty chaotic for the markets. All indications are that it would be pretty chaotic for the markets around the world, if that were to happen. One other thing I want to point out is the Fed did order their own investigation, if you will, into this building that's being renovated. And so they have a report being done by the Inspector General, a review by the Inspector General. Some people are claiming that this is just a stall tactic because, who knows how long it's going to take for them to do that review, and that possibly, it will just delay anybody really getting the facts about some of the decisions that were made in regards to this renovation. So obviously, if the Department of Justice decides to act on this criminal referral for perjury, that could accelerate any sort of review that might be done of the decisions that were made on this building. So anyways, that'll be interesting.